So I'll then read a short story, the day they were leaving, and a kind of parodying of, in many ways, of an awful lot of Scottish fiction is about the day we left the place. So there is both humour there and there is also sadness. The day they were leaving, the islanders carried most of their belongings with them. There were trunks packed with clothes to lower into the vessel that took them from its shore. Tables and chairs were trussed up and tied together. Bedding was folded into the drawers of a cupboard and stuffed into jute sacks. The cuckoo and grandfather clocks given to one of the households a few years before were wrapped in a blanket, taken gently and precariously to a safe place in the hold. The day they were leaving, the islanders kept some of the items that were most precious to them in their close possession, near to the touch of their fingers, the warmth of their skin. Katrina held, for instance, the love tokens a mainlander had given her tight within her shawls. There was a brooch, the shape of a seabird, that he had said had been made for her by a silversmith in Fort William. She had placed it in the envelope, he had said, telling her about his life in the small village to which the islanders were going. I am a woodcutter, he had written, and I'm very good at using an axe and a saw. I bring down the tallest and thickest trees faster than any other man around. I would help you by bringing wood for your fire, and you would cook fine scones and oat cakes above the flames. You would also make soup, potatoes and fish for me when I came home from working on the trees. Not having any idea what the tallest or thickest tree might look like, Katrina was much puzzled by the letter. How did he like his fish to be cooked, she wondered, for she had rarely eaten or prepared it in all her days. On the odd occasion her mother had put one on her plate, she had thought it a pale and tasteless thing, not like the wonderful flavours of the seabirds she loved and relished. And so she sat in the boat, worrying how she could ever make a proper wife for him or any other mainlander. She seemed to be absolutely hopeless at any of the work she would be required to do. On the day they were leaving, she nestled down beside her brother Ian on the boat that took her from the island. He was thinking of these possessions he carried with him in the haversack that hung around his neck. Among them was a scrapbook crammed with bright pictures of amazing birds that Neil, one of those who had left a few years before, had sent him. There were illustrations of the bright and dazzling creatures Neil claimed people captured and cooked on the mainland. Among them was an enormous bird they called an ostrich. Wide-eyed and wondering, Ian took in its long-legged two-legged stride, huge neck and ugly head, the clutch of feathers that trembled on the tips of its wings and backside. How are we going to catch it? He asked himself. And when will we do? How will we wrestle it to the ground? How long too will we pluck it clean? Will we take to pluck it clean of feathers before we can cram it into a pot? He pictured himself and the other islanders gathered outside the walls of the corrugated iron roof cottage he imagined his new home on the mainland might look like. There would be a flurry of black and white feathers clouding their world from the breasts and backs of the giant bird stretched before them. In its fog of plumage, it would be like the mist that often covered and concealed the island, obscuring its high cliffs and crags from views. And then there were all the other birds Neil said existed on the mainland. The pterodactyl with its sharp and jagged beak, the little black emu that scurried around its place, dipping its beak again and again into the earth, the peacock with its 1,000 eyes dotting its magnificent tails, the duck-billed platypus that had neither wings nor feathers. Neil had never explained how it might manage to fly. all their bright and dazzling peculiarities jostled in his head like some fantastic aviary, one that he contemplated again and again the day they were leaving. Among the other items they held in their possession that day was a Bible that fell open at the page of the book of Exodus every time Neil's father, Fergus, raised it in his hand. He had studied its text so often, hoping for some divine revelation when he looked at its favourite passages. Words had told him they were doing the right thing by sailing from these shores and anchoring on the edge of this new world, whose visitors and emissaries had already brought ruin to the one that was warm and familiar to him. No light or knowledge ever came to him, however. He read each chapter and verse about the land which the Jews had been promised by God without any real understanding. It was as if the mountains of the mainland had already cast their shadows upon him, allowing none of the sunlight that glinted on the bay that stretched out before his home. The day they were leaving, Fergus also brought with him a fulmar feather he had found on his doorstep that morning. Cramming it in his pocket as he headed out the door for the last time, he twirled and furled it round his fingers, wondering if he would ever again touch any part of the bird he held most precious in the world. He had heard it said they were not plentiful on the mainland, that the cliffs and crags of the places they were heading for held few of their number, if any at all. For all that he tried to hide it from his wife and children, there were times when he felt hopeless about the bleak and barren mainland they were sailing towards. The day they were leaving, his other son, Calum, held in his possession something he had kept wrapped in an oilskin cloth and wedged into one of the island walls for many years. It was a picture of the woman a visitor had called the Black Venus, the French dancer Josephine Baker. She was crouching in a small dark room and brandishing two large white feathered fans. They concealed much of her body, revealing only her naked shoulders and the sweep of her calves and thighs. Perhaps the feathers came from some of your birds, the tourist who had given him the card had joked. Calum doubted that. He had examined the card for ages before he concluding they were unlikely to have come from, say, a gannet's wings or breasts. They were too large to have originated even from the plumage of that great bird. For all that he experienced a little disappointment about this feeling Joyce jostled with hope. He wondered if there were many women on the mainland who wore feathers like Josephine. Though he was aware the thought might be sinful, he hoped the day would come when he would see one of them, preferably at a time when a good strong gale was blowing, puffing each and every one of the feathers away. Nervously, he chuckled as the idea occurred to him. Tapping the picture with a finger, he hoped that his father would never find it in his pocket. For all that he was a grown man, he was aware that the old man would whip him raw for the offence. The day they were leaving, the islanders carried many of their most important possessions with them. A postcard from a relative exiled on the mainland, a letter featuring the promise of a civil servant in Edinburgh about what would happen when they arrived. For one, it might have been a button that spun loose an hour or so before the boat was due to sail, leaving no time for anyone to sew it on their jacket. For another, it might have been the pipe tobacco he brought with him at all times, ready for a quick puff and smoke. For Myra, it was the lipstick she had been given some years before, yet never had the courage to put on when she lived on the island. Perhaps some night after she arrived on the mainland, she would finally see its shade upon her skin, drawing a bright red circle around her wrinkled, puckered mouth. Most of all, though, they brought the memories of the home they were leaving, recollections of the sound and sight of the seabird that reeled around its crags and cliffs, the seals that sometimes popped up their grey heads in the bay, the feel of island stone on their fingers, the brush of moss and lichen growing upon its walls, the mist that sometimes trailed across each dip and slope, bog and summit, the immensity of the sky that stretched above them on still days, the storms that kept them imprisoned when wind and weather lashed their homes, the miles of sea that fringe its coastline, dividing them from the places to which they were now being taken on this, the day they were leaving its shore